We move now to the parsha of Beshalach, which is the story of how the Israelites left Egypt, the miraculous division of the Reed Sea, and how they were triumphant with the destruction of the pursuing Egyptian army. And the Torah tells us that while the Israelites were busy collecting valuables to take with them at the Exodus, as they left Egypt, that Moses remembered that there had been an oath that Joseph had given the Israelites, that when they leave Egypt, they should take his bones with them and bury him in the land of Canaan, the Holy Land. And the Midrash tells us something very interesting. Moses did not know where to find Joseph's coffin. And the only one who knew was Sarah, the daughter of Asher. She was a grandchild of Yaakov. She was the oldest person alive. And she happened to remember where Joseph was buried. Joseph's coffin had been lowered into the river Nile, and she knew the exact site where it was, and that's where Moses retrieved it. Let's take a little incident, personal incident. When I was a rabbi practicing in Milwaukee, there was an old woman who I knew very well. She died at the age of 106. And I delivered the eulogy at her funeral. And at that point, I cited this incident, that Moses, not knowing where the coffin of Joseph was, had recourse to this old woman, Sarah bat Asher, who knew where it was. And I said, well, wait a minute. Moses frequently spoke to God directly. The Torah tells us that Moses spoke to God just as one person speaks to another. And when Moses wanted to know something, he asked God. Why did he have to go to an old woman to ask where Joseph was? He could simply have asked God, where's Joseph's coffin? But there was a message over here. Sarah bat Asher was a grandchild of Yaakov. She remembered her grandfather. She remembered the great Yaakov. She remembered Yosef. She saw with her own eyes these highly spiritual people, totally devoted to God, living a total life of godliness. You know something? That cannot be duplicated. And what the Torah is telling us with this episode is that even speaking directly to God cannot give you the kind of insight into holiness and spirituality that a person had who saw the patriarchs and who saw how they lived and how they behaved, how they acted. And so at this eulogy of this 106-year-old woman, I said, there are people perhaps who are more learned than she was, who are wiser than she was, but there is something that she had that none of us will ever have. She saw people with greatness in previous generations that will never be duplicated. This is an important message. You know, if we were to accept the theory of evolution, then we are far more advanced and far more perfected than our precursors. And so we're an improvement on the past. And that's dangerous to think so. Because if we don't look back at the past with great reverence, we think we are smarter, and we discard old traditions, old moral laws, old ethics. We're smarter, we know better. After all, grandparents don't know how to program a VCR. The grandchildren do it. They don't know how to retrieve messages off of the cell phone. The grandchildren do it very easily. It comes naturally. We're smarter, aren't we? And the message is, yes, in some ways we're more advanced. But we have to remember that God created Adam, and every generation is one generation further away from the actual handiwork of God. Because if we remember that, then we will have reverence for our past, reverence for our ancestors, reverence for the traditions, and a awareness that the values of the past were true values, not to be substituted by what we think is the advance of modern science. Yes, we appreciate modern science. Yes, we appreciate air conditioning and all the electronics and all the wonderful things and the jet planes and the fax machines and whatever. Those do not make us better people. We have to remember the traditions and the wisdom of the past.